Kitchen Towel Scarf by Share Our World. The first thing we're going to do today is mark our seam allowance. Today our seam allowance is going to be at the 1/2 inch mark. Here's our faceplate. On everybody's faceplate it's marked a little bit differently, but typically your lines are a 1/4 inch apart. So if I come to the edge of the presser foot, that's a 1/4 inch. So here is my 1/2 inch line. We are going to put a piece of tape at our 1/2 inch line so we can easily see our seam allowance. And for this entire project, our seam allowance will be 1/2 inch. What we'll need for this project is some quilting clips, a piece of fabric that is the full width of your fabric by 12 to 13 inches, and a tea towel cut in half so that we have 2 halves of the tea towel. The first thing we're going to do is hot dog style fold our fabric with right sides together. I'm using 4 clips, but you could use lots more, or you could use less, or you could really use pins. And I'm going to only clip half of my fabric, because we are going to leave a turning hole in this long seam, right roughly at the halfway mark. I have it clipped halfway. I'm going to sew at my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Down until I'm about an inch and a half from the center of the fabric. You can kind of tell the center of your fabric because it will have a crease mark from just being folded. I'm going to backstitch. Now I am going to skip about 3 inches from there and start clipping again. So I have, if you can see, I have a 3 inch, I'm going to make about a roughly 3 inch gap. And I can fit my hand into a 3 inch gap. If your hand is a little bit bigger, you can make a slightly larger gap, because it's nice for this particular project to be able to fit your hand into your turning gap. So we're going to clip all the rest of the way to the end. And I'm going to start right, do you see my 3-ish inch gap right here? Again, staying right at the tape that I put on for my seam allowance. Now I have one long seam sewn all the way from one end to the other, with a roughly 3 inch gap to turn my whole work. The next thing I really need to do is I really need to iron my seam. And this seam we are going to iron open. Sometimes there are times to iron open and there's times to iron shut, but this particular case I'd like to iron it open. So I'm going to take this over to my ironing board, and I'm going to open up my seam just like this, and I'm going to iron it flat just like that. So now that we have ironed the seam open, we are going to fold our tea towel. Now I'm going to fold my tea towel so it is the same size as my scarf. There, I have it right there. Just wiggle it until you like it. Then I'm going to put clips on it like this. Clip. And make sure your tea towel's end line up itself. Then I'm going to clip this, making sure all of it is lined up neatly. And I'm going to use probably 3 clips across here because it's not very wide. Just like that. Now I have something on the front of this tea towel And when you fold it, the back side is going to look like it's been folded. So I want to put the front side of my tea towel against the front side of my scarf. So we're going to do right sides together. This will look something like this. Here is the right side of my tea towel, here is the right side of my scarf, and I'm just going to tuck this in here, just like this, kind of keeping it nice and stable. And I want the seam to go more or less down the center of the back. So now I have my tea towel tucked in here, and I have my seam more or less down the center of the back. Now I am going to line up my tea towel with my scarf, so that all 5 layers are lined up carefully together, and then I'm going to clip it. Again, all 5 layers need to be lined up carefully together. If you're having trouble with your tea towel being all bunched up like mine is, just put your hand in your turning hole and grab the end of that tea towel and give it a good yank. Just like that. That'll give you a little bit more control over what you're doing at the end. So now I'm lining up all 5 of my layers right like that, and here at the end I'm going to line up all 5 of my layers just like this. And if you have all of your layers lined up, if you have folded your towel in such a way that it is roughly the same size as your opening, it will lay pretty flat like that. And as you can see, I have my seam more or less down the center of my project. It's not quite down the center, and if you want to be a little bit more careful than that, that's fine. It's not that huge of a deal to make it exactly down the back. So now that I've got this all lined up carefully, and if you can see I have it all lined up carefully. I'm going to put it under my presser foot. Here's the thing about sewing machines. Sometimes a sewing machine will like this thick, and sometimes it will be a little bit grumpy. If it's feeling a little bit grumpy, just put it a little bit put your whole thing a little bit past where the needle goes down, and you will back up to the end. So we will take a few stitches frontwards, and then all the way back to the end. Now remember, I am keeping the end of my scarf at my seam allowance tape, which is at a 1/2 inch. When I get to the end, I'm going to backstitch. And your machine, most of your machines will not have any problem whatsoever with this thickness of fabric, because terry cloth isn't a very dense fabric. We are going to now do the same thing to the other end of the scarf. We are folding this so it matches the size, more or less matches the size. Then I'm going to put 3 clips on my towel, 1, making sure I'm lining up all 3 layers. Now you don't actually have to fold your towel. You could gather it or you could scrunch it, but folding it will make it easier to sew. And I want that front to be, this is the back, so the front needs to be so it's facing the front of my scarf. And we are gonna push that in there really good until all I have is my ends. Now at this point, I want to make sure that my scarf is pretty even. So again, I want that seam more or less down the back of my scarf. Down the center back of my scarf. I am going, and again this bunch, I'm putting my finger into my turning hole that we left on our original long seam. I'm giving this a good yank so it's a little bit easier to work with. There we are. Now I'm going to line these up, and you need to line, the most important thing here is you need to line these up very carefully. If you line these up very carefully, you shouldn't have any problem with this seam. It isn't a hard seam. You just need to line them up very carefully. There I am, all lined up. And we are just about done with our project. We only have one more seam after this one until we are completed. There I have, all lined up, nice and tidy. I'm checking. Do you see I'm checking this right here to make sure that that center fabric, that number 5th one, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That middle one is all the way up so I catch it in my seam. Again, I'm going to start a little bit past where my needle is, I'm going to start a little bit past the needle, and I'm going to take a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to back up all the way to the edge and keep going. I'm keeping the edge of my fabric right next to, at my seam allowance tape. Now that I have this all the way done, my 2 towels are hidden inside. I am going to pull those towels through my turning hole. There's one. There's 2, and you see where the front of my tea towel is next to the front of my scarf. Then you will see that you have just a little gap opening in the back. Now you could ladder stitch this, but we're not going to. We are going to fold this just like this. I'm going to put clips on it. There's a clip, there's a clip, there's a clip. Now I'm going to edge stitch this. There's where my end is. Do you see where my end is? I am going to edge stitch this. When I edge stitch, I start really close to the edge right there, and I stitch all the way till I get to the other end. And I am going to mark the other end with the edge of my clip so I know where it's at. So here is the end of my opening right there, and my clip is just past the end of my opening. When you edge stitch, you want to stitch very exceptionally close to the edge of your fabric. You're going to back stitch, and I want you to observe that I am stitching super close to the edge of my fabric. I will show you this right now. So I want you to see how close I stitched to the edge of my fabric. Do you see there? And there, it's just really close to the edge of my fabric because that's just closing up that gap we made. Then we're going to open this up. This whole thing we're going to open up, and then we are going to take this over to the ironing board and iron it so it's nice and tidy and flat. And the last thing, if you're making this as your Mother's Day present, the last thing you're going to do is wrap it. So I'm going to iron it, and then I will show you the finished project. Here's the finished scarf. Thank you for watching Share Our World.